Your HR function is organized to run the business. But the problem is that stopped being the hard part. What nobody has built yet is the function that changes it.
Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Morris. He's a former CHRO with all the scar tissue to prove it, the man who has reviewed enough HR transformation decks to know that they all end the same way, a reorg, a new title, and the exact same work, and the founder of Propulsion AI. Now, Scott, here is the situation that we're going to talk about. Every CEO that I talk to wants their HR function to be more strategic. And every CHRO that we talk with is trying to be more strategic. And yet, PwC's most recent research shows only 60% of CEOs describe their CHRO as highly effective at being a business partner today. The investment's there, the ambition is there, the outcome keeps coming up short. So today we're going to name why, and we're going to build a frame for what actually fixes it.
You know, before we get into it, the organizations that I've seen who get this right didn't get there by making HR better at what they were already doing. They got there by making a deliberate decision about what HR was for and what it's not for. And that distinction sounds really simple, but it's not. I think most organizations keep avoiding that subject because the conversation that follows it is really uncomfortable.
It really is. And we brought someone into this conversation today that's been thinking about that discomfort for quite some time now. In fact, he's built a framework for what comes out the other side. More on that at the end of the state of play. In the business, that is what we call a teaser.
A teaser. But let's also do what they call in the business a shout out, Jackson. And this week's shout out is to Marissa in Atlanta, Georgia. Marissa, thank you so much for being a part of this community. It means more to us than you know that you're here. And to everybody listening in, whether you're joining us from Kamsach, Austria, or from Mansfield, Texas, we're really glad that you showed up today.
And we're glad that you're here. Very, very grateful. And we're going to make it absolutely worth your time.
We're going to do one more thing, Jackson, because I want to talk about the Ascent Academy for a second. I want everybody to just take 30 seconds and think about the performance problem that you're most focused on right now. And now ask yourself, is that about a person, or is it about how the system that's around that person was designed? Jackson's CHRO Ascent Academy teaches CHROs to read the difference between one and the other before they act. And, Jackson, I know because I've looked at it, there's a lot of feedback from your graduates with some strong themes about material being immediately relevant and participants able to apply the ideas the very same week that they're in the program with you. So seats are limited, folks. Check it out at mytalentsherpa.com.
Yep, starting on May 15th. Okay, let's dive into it. Here is where we are. The HR business partner model is roughly 30 years old, 1996, I think. And Dave Ulrich designed a function that would sit inside the business and translate talent decisions into business outcomes. And that mandate made great sense on paper. The problem is that most organizations took that model and they changed the title without actually changing the work. The service orientation stayed. The compliance orientation, it stayed. And the reporting structures that kept HR one step removed from real capital decisions stayed. And then we spent 3 decades wondering why the function could not operate at enterprise altitude.
And the framing that keeps surfacing is that HR needs to be more strategic. When you hear that from CHROs, you hear it from a bunch of people, including CEOs. And, the CEO wants it, and the CHRO wants it, and the CHRO wants a strategic team, and the HR business partner wants a strategic role. And, PwC's research shows that only 60% of CEOs actually describe their CHRO as a highly effective business partner, even now, even today after 30 years. And that number has moved really slowly despite years of investment in different types of transformation. In 2024, Mercer's Voice of the CHRO report found that 41% of CHROs say that they want greater depth in data analytics, which means that, even at the top of the function, the diagnostic capability for strategic work is still being built. The capability problem is real, but it's downstream of a design problem that most organizations just keep skipping past.
And here's where that design problem becomes visible. Hybrid work is fragmenting how and where work happens. AI, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's changing what work requires for humans and everything else. Skill-based resourcing we've talked about before, it's reshaping how talent moves inside organizations. And real estate decisions, by the way, are shaping collaboration patterns. We never talk about that in ways that HR, IT, and facilities are each addressing from their own lane, but not together. And Gallup's 2024 State of the Global Workforce report found that employee engagement dropped from 23 to 21%, which is costing an estimated $438 billion in lost productivity globally, which is a lot. And that's the second decline in over a decade. And the dominant response has been more manager training, better benefits, improved communication, which is treating all work design problems as people problems.
So, what I think is going on with this, Jackson, is that every function optimizes its own slice and nobody really owns the whole system. IT deploys a collaboration platform, and HR designs the onboarding program, and real estate configures the workspace. The person doing the actual work is navigating three independently designed systems that were never really reconciled together. And that's not a talent problem. That's an organizational design problem, and it doesn't have an assigned owner. And until you name who's accountable for that whole system of things, you're going to keep throwing capable people at a structural problem and calling the results a performance gap.
That's exactly the frame for today's conversation. And it's a frame that led me to reach out to our guest. Phil Kirschner is someone that I met when he was already a listener of this show. And he had very strong opinions about where the org design conversation needed to go. And grateful that he reached out. He's done this work from every angle across Credit Suisse, JLL, WeWork, McKinsey. He's sitting exactly at the intersection that we've been describing for the last 20 years. And for the past several years, he's been building the intellectual architecture for the function that does not yet exist in most organizations. And he calls it the chief of work. Phil, welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast. Before we get into the assumptions, what's your read on what Scott and I just laid out?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to go from being a listener to asking a question, and here we are. In particular, as someone who has identified myself as a Sherpa, I love that you have that name, and super excited. I think, so what you said resonates absolutely, and someone who comes from outside of core HR, even just to hear you lean into the business partner as the anchor role for this, and thinking about the half of my career spent on the practitioner side in three different groups internally. If you had asked me, like, do I identify from that time having a business partner, many of whom were really good friends, being involved in change the work, design the work kind of conversations, I cannot think of any example where I would apply that. And that was at the kind of company in sort of large financial services where business partners were present in at least three, if not four, of the core kind of shared services functions. So you've got HR business partner, IT business partner, finance business partner, maybe operations if I remember, but all of them I think of still as handlers in a way, right? They're translating how the sausage gets made for the business. They are trying to pass information critically back and forth, but we're not in the weeds for this feels clunky, broken, full of friction. How do we do it differently? At least not the memory that I have.
So let's get into what's keeping the organizations from closing that gap today. So I think the first assumption is one I've held for a long time, and I think most senior HR leaders would probably recognize it. It sounds like this. If we can get the HRBP to be more strategic, then we've solved the problem. Find better talent, reduce the administrative noise, tighten the mandate so the expectations are explicit. But I challenge that the assumption underneath is, the assumption underneath that I think is right, and it's the right vehicle, but we're running a talent problem inside of it. What it misses, I think, is that you can put excellent people into a role structurally designed to produce a service outcome, and they're going to produce, guess what? A service outcome. And that design does not care about the capability of the person in it.
Jackson, let me name why I think that assumption feels right, because it's not careless thinking. When you're inside of a large HR organization, the visible evidence is about execution. What did you do today? Did the onboarding happen? Did the performance review cycle close? Did the benefits renewal go smoothly? Right, and those deliverables require capable people, and the assumption that somehow better people produce better outcomes is a rational conclusion, but it's from the wrong data set. So, Phil, when you've walked into organizations going through this kind of transformation, what does that assumption look like when it's running at full speed?
You're right. And I like your point, Jackson, that if you take even a highly capable, strategic, motivated, sleeves up business partner trying to know more about the business of the business, and the business they're in is still sort of service oriented, but more on top of the reputation of the function that they represent, 9 times out of 10 is going to be one of slowing me down, right? Like, oh, that process is coming back around. It's happening to me, or it's taking longer than I want to build that new system or hire that new person. The whole like aura of the function from which, the fog from which this business partner emerges and goes, I'm here to help. I want to be strategic. Strictly from a change management perspective, the client is carrying this burden of just being burned or slowed down or bothered by the 1,000 people behind that one business partner, which means maybe it's not even their fault, but they're walking into, it's like an unfair fight. In addition to the fact that it's designed for repetition, for running the company, as we'll get into, I'm sure, and not for trying to help my people work faster, better, smarter.
Well, I think part of that, Phil, and I'd love your take on this, is you grow up in organizations as a younger human resources person, and you are asked to look at the business with a compliance lens. And then you end up, as an HRBP, running all these programs. And what is the primary thing you're asked to do? Make sure that people are actually complying with the program as intended. And so you have a business logic that is absent, and you have a compliance logic instead. And one of the challenges with the CHROs that I work with is, as you get more advanced in the organization and your enterprise scope expands, you still have all the people you're interacting with that think of you as the compliance person they grew up learning to work around. And now all of a sudden we have a structural problem, and it kind of doesn't matter who's in the chair, but it also really matters who's in the chair. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it resonates directly. While I may not have been a business partner, I started my career in information security. So that hi, I'm here because you're building something gnarly and we have questions because I work for a regulated company. And it was always smiles and polite. Like, you're not here for fun. You're here because of the kind of company that we are. You didn't just pick on me. But I could always tell that the leader was like, how do I get through this as, quickly and reasonably as possible? And then no matter how many good ideas you bring to the surface, help us close the risk landscape, help us avoid an audit, help us do anything positive. I can maybe remember one time where a group would have come back proactively the next time and said, we want you to be here to help us think about how to do this differently from scratch, instead of waiting till we set off the alarm somewhere. And it's just so difficult to be representing a process orientation, a compliance orientation, and to show up even charismatic, excited business of the business, got your change cape on, and be like, I'm here to do good, but they still see you as like, how do I get through this form?
Yeah. There's a corporate version of the old Ronald Reagan joke. What are the scariest words in the English language? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Right. So my question, Phil, is what's the concrete cost when you don't change that base assumption?
Yeah. I mean, at minimum, you're just in a negative reinforcing cycle of lost credibility for you. You're losing a seat at the table. To the extent that your client ever expected the work might change, you might be there to help them, I think their patience for that happening is very small. So then you kind of lose your window. And you mentioned real estate. I come a bit from the built environment. I think we saw this a bit in core COVID. A lot of real estate teams were thrust into the spotlight. Like, you're here now. We're talking about real health and safety, touchless entry, all that stuff, and social distancing that we don't want to think about anymore. But like, they were there. And in that moment, I think maybe a very small percentage, 5% of real estate workplace leaders were able to demonstrate a certain level of value. And the others were, sent back to where they were, if not further back down the chain. I used to work for the CFO, and now I report to procurement, who reports to the CFO. And what happened there? So I think it's an erosion. And with the pace of change now, leaders are just moving on. Like, you can't get that second at bat in the way that you're structured today.
You talk about pace of change, Phil. Let me push us forward to the next assumption, and it's one that I think AI is reinforcing right now. And it goes something like this. Once we automate all of this administrative work that the HR function has to do, then HR is going to have the capacity for the strategic work that they've always wanted to do. If you remove the burden from, the people, then the strategic capability is somehow just going to emerge. Now, SHRM's research shows that only about 39% of HR functions have, AI adopted at all today in any capacity. So this is mostly, I think, a future promise being used to justify a current structure. The problem is that capability and capacity aren't the same thing. And just removing work from somebody's calendar doesn't always produce the skills. I think it's fair to say that with some people, the administrative is really holding them back. But I don't think it holds across the board, right? Just removing the work doesn't produce the skills or create a mandate to do different work. It just opens the calendar.
Yeah, which is not bad in and of itself. But let me double click on that, because I think the deeper problem there, Scott, is that the work that we're describing, whether it's kind of work design, organizational friction, the reliability architecture, all of that requires a different operating orientation than what HR was built for, right? Running payroll demands reliability at scale. Diagnosing why a high-performing team is losing executional reliability demands structural acuity and the authority to intervene in how work's designed. And those aren't the same, right? And oftentimes we'll put both of those roles, both of those mandates on the same person. And my history, at least, is it always will default to the lowest altitude, because that someone who's used to operating at high altitude is going to have a hard time downshifting fast enough. So Phil, where do organizations, from your experience, discover that gap most painfully?
Yeah, so it's absolutely true that I think most organizations, most leaders are just assuming that freeing up the time will magically create new pockets of productivity. I just had to look this up. It was the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, and Duke University did a CFO survey that found workers using AI tools report time spent on certain tasks increased by 346%. The AI course that I help facilitate for, we talk about Parkinson's law a lot, which says that basically our effort expands to fill the time. If you have a paper due tomorrow, you get it done tomorrow. If it's due in 2 weeks, it just like expands. And the water will always like flow to the path of least resistance. If I have an extra hour because my AI assistant helped me write that email, I'm more likely to write 20 more emails than to look at some higher order North Star for the work I've always wanted to do. And it's really scary to do that. My own article just today literally is about this kind of white knuckled feeling of I've got AI, we're doing everything. We have more meetings, we're recording transcripts, we're sharing documents, I'm making stuff. But very few companies have like let go and put themselves into the scary void where things may very well get worse before they get better. But that's the design, right? Of like, how are we going to let go of something we didn't do or we don't do anymore and grab onto something we were never able to do without this capability, instead of just thinking it lets us like write more emails faster.
Well, so Phil, what do you say to the CHRO who hears all of this, and then the response is this what you're telling me is just there's going to be more work, right? The technology is just going to produce more of the same kind of work that I've got today, not less. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, look, if you're measuring adoption, you're going to get people leaning into adoption, which is the same as if you measure, or you prioritize on-site presence, you get the coffee badging that happens of like, yeah, I'm here. People will lean into the input and not the output. If you say it is intolerable that it takes 10 days for us to make a widget, and can bring people into the conversation, say there are new capabilities available to us, which hopefully after some basic training, you're all at least peripherally aware of. If, without getting anyone in trouble or firing anybody tomorrow, can we like put all the problems on the table and try to figure out why is it 10 days? Or how could we try and experiment something else? And these technologies are so good at piloting and creating. But again, you have to lean into the world where the names in the boxes may change, where the system you always love may change, where in the case of a business partner, I think who's at IBM very famously a couple of years ago, just like shut off all the ways to talk to HR that wasn't through a chatbot. And hearing their CHRO talk about the story, a lot of the fear was just, if I'm a business partner, my value is derived from when my client picks up the phone and calls me. That's painful. So you have to do a bit of a pre-mortem on that kind of the human resistance to the technological presence and set a durable, galvanizing North Star for the bigger change you're trying to see. That's not every little experimentation, because some of them are going to go sideways for sure.
But what the unsaid thing, I think you're saying it implicitly. I want to call it out directly. The work has to get redesigned. It's one of the reasons we build actual teammates, not platforms, and we put them on the org chart, is because we want people to be able to say, the CHRO to be able to say, that work doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to this digital teammate. Your work is now something else, and I'm going to help you redesign around that. That's what I think a really smart CHRO right now is thinking about, the different ways to do.
Yes, naming the workflows, naming the work. I just don't see, I came from not just a bank, but a Swiss bank that loved a good kind of process map. But even coming in out of clients of different industries, I honestly don't see evidence of it happening in the way that it was for me years ago. I didn't see it before COVID. I don't see it now. And that's the kind of thinking, like, who just walks around and documents, this is the way things happen, period, today. And we can align the outcome, the performance measures to it, so that there at least is a precedent for if you want to be curious about how to redesign some aspect of the work where there is pain or friction, sluggishness, attrition, whatever it is.
Yeah, we're gonna. That's an entirely different podcast. We might actually pull a bunch of all-stars back for that one, because there is a skill inside of HR that is necessary, that is not there today. And I've posted about this. It's included in the Ascent Academy that we talked about earlier. But it is this can't be given to the HRBP. They don't have the background and experience to be able to deliver that. But let me push us into the third assumption. And this one I'm going to probably make some people upset with, because it's pretty diagnostic. And I think it's also the one that closes the conversation before it can start. We end up talking about organizations that read engagement scores, and we look at attrition rates, and we talk about productivity metrics as leading indicators of the work system health. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think by the time the engagement drops 2 points and ultimately shows up in a survey, the work system has been producing that outcome for 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months. And those are the results of a design problem, not kind of the location. So think about it this way. When the C-suite then reads a declining number and says, HR, go fix this part of the culture, they're asking the function responsible for the people outcomes to diagnose and repair a system it doesn't own. And I would even argue that and have quite loudly, I think, that culture is decision residue. So if you want to know what your culture is, go back and look at your last 100 decisions. You're going to find it. And yet then you are told, go fix these engagement scores. And that's ultimately where the conversation breaks down every time.
It doesn't just break down the conversation. It produces the wrong interventions. Because if engagement is a work design problem, presenting as a people problem, then more manager training and better recognition programs and improved cadence for communication, they treat the symptoms and they leave the system that produced the outcome alone. I think a lot of organizations cycle through those interventions again and again and again. They see modest improvements, and then they watch the numbers drift back because the underlying work was never changed. Phil, what is that diagnostic error? I mean, to the degree that you agree with that, what's the diagnostic error cost organizations in concrete terms?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Just jump back, since you mentioned Gallup earlier, I think I'm on my 4th year now in a row of every time Gallup releases its major workplace study where the goes down 2%, up 2%. The graph always stops on the y-axis at 40%. As long as I've been looking at this report, and I post the same thing every year, which is what happens if you move it to 100%? And you notice that these little blips don't matter. We haven't changed the system. That's one.
At all.
2, I do not come from the world of engagement surveys, but have come to appreciate, having had to take them and analyze the data, the stark difference between the kind of survey that most companies send asking employees, I agree or disagree that we make good decisions, I get feedback, where the problem, as you said, you send someone off to figure out why is marketing grumpy? Like, what's going on over there? Something's wrong with them. We should fix what's wrong with them. And the leadership goes about assuming that everything is going to be fine. When I got to McKinsey and I first started learning about the Organizational Health Index and assumed it was an engagement survey, I was sort of slapped in several ways by the organization. Be like, no, this survey is very different. And I came to appreciate why. And it's because it asks questions about observable leadership behaviors. Not I agree, disagree, from never to always. Do you see leaders giving feedback publicly about like how to improve a process, work, whatever it is? And it's really scary for leaders because it's all of a sudden shining a light up instead of down. So I think the real cost is the longer you keep doing some version of a survey that is oriented on, is every little branch of my tree happy? The longer you are prolonging the fact that it may very well be your behaviors that are connectable to some kind of outcome, whatever it is you want to see, because we don't give feedback. We don't make decisions fast enough, or we lose people in pockets that we don't want. But without shining a light on yourself, the system will never change. Jackson, to your point, the people who make the decisions are the catalyst of that system and that culture. And they don't get a lot of feedback.
So honestly, what's the signal that would allow a CEO or CHRO to address the root cause better?
I mean, even culturally, that you are willing to measure feedback, like pulse. Something else I was really impressed with while at McKinsey, it started before I was there and I assume continues now, was just a willingness to send regular, how you doing, pulses every week, and to share the good and the bad. When there were contractions or pressures, like you'd see it as soon as you took the survey. But it gave the entire organization some regular heartbeat that didn't feel biased towards some outcome to know is something that I'm doing working, or kind of like raising the pulse where it should. So I think it's the signal of, are you okay with it? Are you okay with people asking other questions and treating your employees like customers? Because like personally, again, from the workplace side, I've had, as a practitioner with many clients, tried to add questions to those surveys and been told by HR sort of, no, like we have our way of doing it. We like this survey. We can't possibly ask more questions. So then you're just burying the feelings that people have and they'll take them somewhere else.
Oh boy, that's a Pandora's box that we can open up. I'm a strong advocate for more frequent, almost like zero questions. But that's a debate for a different time. But I do want to build on something that you shared there, and I think there's a mechanism underneath all this. The natural inclination is for people to treat the symptoms, not the loop that produces them. And we can talk about how we get better information on that. But there is that one loop I think that's worth naming explicitly. And every function that touches the work system is optimizing for their own outcomes, which is fine if you only are concerned about your own outcomes. So IT deploys the collaboration stack to reduce ticket volume and improve adoption, probably not to improve collaboration. Real estate designs the workplace to maximize utilization and reduce the cost per square foot. HR measures, I don't know, something like onboarding completion rates and engagement score. And then we try to optimize all these, and they might candidly be legitimate metrics inside their own lane. I'm not going to argue that point, but none of them are actually metrics for whether work is designed well for the people that are doing it. And, sorry for my TED talk here, but because each function is accountable to their own lane, no one is accountable for the combined output of all of it.
That's exactly the point. And I think you've made it perfectly. What makes it hard to see from the inside is that everybody's doing their job right? IT isn't failing and HR isn't failing. And the real estate function, I think that was the third one you mentioned, that it's not failing. And, the individual functions are executing, but the system that those functions collectively produces the thing that's not working. Right? It's the combined effort. And the reason nobody fixes it is that there's no role at the organization whose mandate is to read the combined output and then intervene when it's producing friction. And Phil, that's one of the things that immediately resonated for me about the work that you do and the things that you're thinking about. You've been the person in the room at McKinsey or at WeWork or at JLL that, was working at the intersection of people and place and technology. And when that loop is running inside of an organization, tell us what it looks like on the ground. What are the visible, signs that, nobody owns the whole system, and what do you do about it?
Yeah, two easy ones, maybe. One is you can see it in the digital layer. If an employee encounters a problem with their day, whatever that is, if they have to go to more than one place or think for even a heartbeat, where do I submit that problem? It means, you're putting the burden on them, and odds are they won't even bother. The more sort of fluid and chaotic that the day gets, and the more especially different places you could go, I'm more likely to physically move away from where there is a problem than bother to tell anybody about it if it's not directly in my path to success. If it's my desk, my monitor, and it's not turning on, it's my problem right now. But if I'm in a more fluid space, I'm kind of hybrid, I share space, I'm just going to go somewhere else and assume someone will fix it. And maybe the second example I thought was the empty chair. I used to experience this directly at Credit Suisse. I helped build an environment that was highly oversubscribed, more people than places to sit. So you want every spot, like a hotel, humming, right? You can't have rooms that don't work. And there would be times when a spot would just fester for some weird reason, but depending on who you ask, you get a different answer. IT will just assume that it's cabling, monitors, power. Oh, they can't sit there, so they're not. Real estate will assume it is something about the built environment. Maybe the desk doesn't go up or down, or the arm is broken, or something spilled. And it may actually turn out to be a people problem. Not that's an HR policy, but the local senior ranking somebody has just made a subculture of only Bob is allowed to sit there. And so everyone else is just terrified to do it. But there's no group to show up without the bias or the fear of saying the truth, right? The person in HR in that group doesn't want to say that senior managing muckety muck has created a shadow system that's breaking the environment for hundreds of other people that don't work for them. They don't feel safe saying it.
Yeah, well, you're speaking my language here, because when I would walk into a senior leader meeting every Monday morning and someone was sitting in my chair, it was awful. But what you're really describing here is where the reframe lives. And so let's dive in and build it. Here's where I think the structural shift is. The HR function was designed to do two different jobs, and it was never designed to do them separately. You needed to run the business, which, I'm talking about payroll, compliance, benefits, onboarding, logistics, HRIS, staffing, running core programs that kind of get bigger as the company life cycle kind of matures into the future. Those are things that have to happen. They have to happen reliably. They have to happen at scale. And, at least the logical thinking behind, or the conventional thinking behind it, is that they should happen with minimal variance. And then there's this change the business stuff, right? That's the work design, the organizational effectiveness, the definition of what role clarity looks like, understanding where the friction is, the systems that shape people, how they actually produce outcomes. And those two jobs, I think, require different people with different maybe incentives, and they're absolutely measured against completely different outcomes. But then you like put them all under the auspices of an HR business partner, and you wonder why you get one and not the other. When you're asking the same function to do both, you get a function that does neither at the organizational level the business needs. And if you do one of them, it's going to be the tactical one. It's not going to be the harder one, whether that's because we go after the dopamine hits, or whether that's a capability issue, or whether that's a mandate issue. We can unpack that, I guess. But, Phil, before we build this out, does that framing match what you've seen?
Yes, absolutely. It definitely holds. I think it holds across HR, IT, real estate. Very hard feeling of most of the energy going to run the place, and an episodic feeling of excitement when the people who run the place, I would argue, even think they are doing something that is changing the place. Sticking with real estate, right? Like, oh, I have to renew a lease or move us across town. It feels like a change, and it is in a way, and it's a different set of energy than the person who is trying to literally keep the lights on and the doors from falling off. But it's not a step change, right? It is the move the current state into some place it has to be because someone told us to, and not a change we're being deliberate about. And the people who are buried under the weight of that run the place organization, they tend to be the most progressive, the most interested in aligning outside of functions. Someone I know in digital workplace used the phrase trauma bonded peers with me recently. And I just loved it because like you feel this pain. And the second, even when you're trying to do something good, if one person leaves from that network of misfits, the body rejects the organ, everyone kind of shuts back to we run the thing, and life goes on like there was no change.
Yeah, that's how you end up with an organizational black eye, don't you think, Scott?
Well, I'll tell you what, Jackson, and I think you're asking me that question to see you're just trying to work in black eye. Anybody who's not watching the podcast, if you're watching it on YouTube, you can see that I have a black eye, and it's from my 177-pound Great Dane slamming into my face. But anybody listening on Spotify was spared that, Jackson, until right now. I was head of HR for an organization of 15,000 people. And we successfully split the urgent from the strategic. And I'll tell you from the practitioner side that, it's not like the day-to-day run the trains job isn't important. It's critically important. We ran 4 payrolls. You don't get payroll wrong. There are consequences if you do that. But splitting the work is really important. But you can't split it and leave it. Phil, that's one of the reasons that I really like your chief of work concept, because I think to be successful, all of the tactical work has to go where, with the people that have the skills to do the tactical work. It's a different skill set. And what's left over, you have to think deliberately. Have I hired the person that has the knowledge, skills, abilities, attitude, belief system, etc., to handle that strategic work? But you still have to have somebody looking over the top of it. Yeah. And thinking about how the things integrate together, whether that's the two sides of HR, tactical, strategic, or whether it's IT, HR, real estate that we've been talking about, right? Phil, where does that show up in your experience?
Where does it show up today, or where should it?
Where have you seen, I've got an example of where I did it. Where have you seen good examples of that happening?
Yeah. So I think it's really important, as you said, to split the kind of run and the strategy. I'd even say within the strategy and change the place, there's probably an implied divider line between change the bits that 95% of the employees are not going to experience or see explicitly, right? Like we're going to a new market, we're hiring a new kind of employee. Like that's change, different skill set than I'm running 4 payrolls. But the kind of chief of work construct, or what I sometimes synthesize down to like either like a human COO or who is the head of what it feels like to work here is the human side of the change. The adoption of AI, the rhythms, the moments, the journeys that affect all employees in some way, shape, or form that no one is thinking about in BAU, certainly not thinking about to change. So the kind of points of light out there where I'm starting to see this are companies that have created like an employee experience product manager and using product related language instead of just journey design related language. One is more of a one and done. We made journeys and personas and that's cool. The other is a bit more, I own the impact, or group like putting onboarding in someone's title, a single workflow, single journey, saying like you own this thing end to end. Maybe we pull someone from HR, someone from IT, we put you together. Is it totally independent? Not necessarily. A lot of the virtual or remote first companies, the ones for whom the actual administrative ways of working are more important because you have more employees who are like all of us just at home at the moment, like no one's sitting over their shoulder. Dropbox is a great example of that. They have a program, they call it Virtual First. They have a head of Virtual First that sits in the CHRO organization. Not only do they look after employee experience and workplace, but they pick up a gathering design. Gathering becomes a function. We all do it. We will help you plan it, run it, execute, measure outcome. That sits there. Is it absolutely everything? Does she own like the deployment of Slack for them? I don't think so, but like it's a really great start when you're seeing these little bits of work design showing up in a title, employee experience, product owner as a title. It shows me that this is starting to be a recognized problem.
So double click on that a little bit. I had not heard the chief of work until you and I had some conversations leading into this. The product framing, I think, is really, really important. It changes the whole nature of like the frame of reference of who you're solving problems for. It's not solving for compliance. You actually have to make things work better. But one of the things you mentioned in our pre-meeting is this chief of work has to be outside the function it's reading. Could you help us understand why you think that's so important?
Yeah, I think, again, I am not precious about the title. I am not precious about reporting or depth, but I do believe that this bucket of energy, which you could probably seed with some of the misfits and the trauma bonded peers who are there already. You could grab a couple of them, put them anywhere independent. COO, chief of staff, office of the CEO, office of productivity, whatever, anything, because you need them to be able to monitor and speak truth. Why is this particular process running poorly? Like, because we spent some time with them and the leader of that function is behind, like digitally, is still enforcing things to be done old ways, or they are forcing themselves to come into an office that is specifically terrible at the one thing that they have to do really well. And to not feel like they're going to get fired because they report to the head of real estate or head of HR or the person who rolled out the chatbot that is actually creating negative implications for the work. They can call the baby ugly a little bit. And so they should be one part, I've kind of called it a organizational Fitbit, or like the F1, pit crew, right? We could tell, they'll phone into the driver. This is all the stuff we're seeing from the telemetry of the car, but you're literally still driving the car. It's your choice, your group, your team, your outcomes. But I can tell you that when you're going around a turn a certain way, you're taking it too hard, and it's negatively impacting your performance in the car. And then hopefully, when you see a process like an onboarding, and they have the aha moment, oh, this affects everybody. We're all really bad at this. That they could apply for, get, and invest funding centrally to tactically fix these little, work design problems instead of waiting for months. Like, oh, IT has to do this thing. Then HR has to approve that policy. And we got to wait till we renew the lease next year for real estate instead of just, buckle up. Let's try something we'll do it. We'll take it, or we'll give you the funding to do it. Don't worry about it.
So that's really interesting, Phil. And I think let me maybe take a little different lens on this. I think what you are describing is a function that treats organizational friction as a diagnostic signal rather than the management failure. And I think that's a very, very core shift. And I just want to double underline that for a second, because I think the old model would presume that friction is a talent problem. So the solution is always an intervention around the people involved. I'm gonna send you to finishing school, or I'm going to teach you how to give good feedback, or I'm going to have a learning intervention of some broader kind. But the model you're talking about is different. It assumes that friction, when you see it, is a design problem. So the solution is always a systems intervention, not a people one. And the person doing the diagnosis has to be positioned outside the system to be able to read that clearly. And if I understand it correctly, I think that is what separates your chief of work idea from a really talented HRBP. The HRBP is inside the system. In fact, we put partner in the title, which is a ceiling in my view. I don't even like the title, but partner is not. It places a limit of what you can do, but it reinforces that you are in a service environment. The chief of work that you just described reads it from the outside with accountability for what that combined output produces. So do I have that right?
Yes, I think so. It's a particular, the misfits that I think about, the ones who do or are obsessed with people listening, let's say, and engagement. Even though engagement surveys may not be that effective, the person who is at the bottom of that stack and runs the engagement survey and has a data like or IO psych kind of background is probably really interesting, and probably unbeknownst to the heads of HR is, got some weekly shadow meeting with the person who does digital collaboration strategy, and they've got a buddy in real estate that trades information with them, right? That's happening. And if you take those people who are almost always curious, like data-oriented, human-centered, experimentation friendly, like also usually pretty low ego, and not like I know the way. It's just like, I think I know a better way. Will you go with me on this? And if we're wrong, or like it doesn't work, I will unwind or we'll try something else. And I will not feel bad about that. And like, I will not hide from maybe I had a bad idea. Like those people, you put them independently, you give them the data scientist, give them human-centered researcher, give them someone with a Six Sigma black belt. Right? Like we've done work design for years on the operational logistics side, like building cars. Oh yeah, down to a science. We just don't think of the shop floor logic for work, where maybe it is training in the end. Maybe there is a thing you don't know that you should know, but that shouldn't be the leading assumption, right? That there's something here, we're going to find it, and it's going to be fun, and I want to do it with you, not to you.
But those are qualities of it being a systems problem and not a people problem. The system isn't working, so we're going to tweak a little thing. We're going to see if it makes the system work better. That's different than how we fix people problems.
Yeah. And look, with the addition with AI these days is just you can get people engaged in the redesign of their own work, which, if framed properly and with curiosity, I think is so engaging. Like, this is exciting. I'll take away my own toil. But you can't lead with, there's a thing you don't know and you have to know. We send you to finishing school, or ChatGPT finishing school to learn how to prompt better.
Yeah. And you mentioned up front in this, Phil, and I just want to make sure that the audience hears this. You talked about pre-mortems, and that is such a critical component to the red team concept that we've talked about on this podcast numerous times, because it is something that you have to be curious about whether what you've designed will reliably deliver the outcome you're designing for. And that causes a couple problems. One problem is you might not have actually thought about the outcome before you started with the design. That really it's a frame of reference challenge. But the second one is you have to have a permission structure that says, I don't think this is going to work the way you think it's going to work. Now, I don't think this means what you think it means. And to quote one of my favorites.
Inconceivable.
Yeah. You keep using that word, but I don't think you know what it means.
Prepare to die.
Yeah.
Okay. For those under the age of 40, we'll put that in the show notes. This is the part of the podcast, I guess, just transitioning that we want to talk about what do we do with this? Because it's a really interesting, deep conversation, but we need concrete actions of what someone in a leadership position can do starting next Monday. So, Phil, before Scott and I get into ours, what's the one thing that you would tell a CHRO to do starting Monday?
Pick some journey experience, cross-functional moment. It could be really big, like onboarding, which is gnarly. And I think that's always where people start because every company onboards somebody to something. That is somewhat universal. It could be as small as just meetings. Meeting culture is awful. We were bad at it before COVID. We're worse at it now. There are excellent books out there that talk about how to make your meetings better. And the books are usually multi-function, like cross-functional. They'll say, here's some technical things you could do, or some leadership things you could do. But there's no one person that you can hand that to at a company to just fix it. So it's a good example of a thing to pretend you had that little group, go out and just eyes open, do a study. You all are in meetings all the time. What is good about them? What is not good about them? Technical people, just pick one, but let them come to your senior level group and tell you the truth.
You know what I love about the fact that you started there, Phil, is that I think it's the right starting point. The diagnosis has got to come before the design every time. We're in such a hurry to go do problems and fix things, and we don't spend enough time really doing the diagnosis. I think you've got a great starting point.
Yeah, and then lead by examples. Like if you come up with an example or an idea, when I was at McKinsey, one of our employee experience design programs of the company, they were one of the ways of making meetings better in the hybrid sense. They explored those 3D cameras that can like pick up multiple faces in one room. It was the executive team that tried it first. So just everybody seeing that they were leading with the idea after the diagnostic, where it may or may not have worked. And I think they were actually pretty clear to say, this is better than it was, but it's still a little weird. And we're humans too, and we're figuring it out. Dog fooding immediately got everybody on board. Like, we can do this. This is not you telling me you figured it out from the beginning. You're going through the motions too. So I'd say that, yeah, diagnose first and then lead by example.
Okay, let me push this forward to play number 2. Here's what I would do. Pull your HR headcount budget and then look at all the names, and next to each of the roles and each line item, put a word, run or change. That exercise, I think, is diagnostic, and you don't have to restructure anything to complete it.
Yeah. Or not sure, which would maybe be worse, right? Run, change, or
fair enough. What I think you will find, though, in most organizations is that the large majority of the function sits in the run column, and that's not inherently wrong. The problem is when that distribution is invisible, or where you are trying to have the same person accountable for both. And like I mentioned before, my experience is it will always default to the run if you give it a dual mandate. And so I think that opens up the ability to have a conversation with your CEO about what needs to change, and it allows you to start with a shared picture of what actually exists today.
Here's mine. I would find a manager whose team is underperforming, and please don't send them to training and watch the episode that Jackson and I do about leadership development training. Don't send them to training. Instead, sit with them for an hour and just ask one question and probe the heck out of it. What about how the work is structured is getting in your people's way? Not culture, not attitude, not skill gaps, the structure of the work itself. I think that conversation is going to tell you more about your organization's work design than, any engagement survey is going to do. And it gives you a concrete entry point. You talk, well, Phil, I listen to you say, dog fooding, which I love the term, right? Like, you don't have to have the complete chief of work function from day one to do it. You can do that small piece yourself, and it leads you to really understand how you would structure it at scale.
Yeah. Right. Just try it. I love your idea. Just try. And you may find out from the conversation that the reason that some group thinks something is clunky is something they perceive they cannot control. That's upstream or downstream, right? Like, we wait forever for something and it kills us. It just kills the vibe. Like, we can't keep going, but you never know until you ask.
Okay, here's play 4, and this is going to go under the headline "You only live once." So if you're bold, this is where I would lean in. Now I would do this. I think you should consider doing this. I think it could add stuff. Okay, now I've built this up enough. Here's the idea. Take the accountability gap question directly to your CEO and ask the question: who in this organization is accountable for how work is designed and executed across kind of the HRIT real estate? Not who touches it, but who actually owns that combined outcome. And my guess is, unless you're working with Phil, the answer is going to be unclear or it's going to be distributed. And you've now identified part of that mandate gap. And the conversation, I think, can lead into the opening for a chief of work type role, whatever we want to call that. Phil, close us out. What's the play that you think most organizations skip?
Look, treat work like a product. We mentioned AI and hybrid and skills-based work, and all that stuff is a driving trend for why work is less predictable. But let's not forget the same trends are creating massive leaps and bounds in our personal lives, how we personalize everything. And I can talk to my house and it can do all sorts of weird stuff. And yet I go to work and everything feels clunky and I'm filling out paper forms. We are bringing our consumer lives and preferences to work. So we have to think of the work experience as a product so that your employees consistently resubscribe. I think Dropbox actually uses that language that you're always resubscribing to the job. So you got to treat the employees the way you would think about customer experience, and then it becomes much more obvious. But name it.
So how does the CHRO know if they've actually moved forward on that, Phil?
I mean, to the point on the splitting the function, I think the hardest challenge for all of them, maybe even just emotionally, is are you the run CHRO or are you the change CHRO? And if your skill set, which is not my skill set, right, is that brutally effective operator for that function, like know that, name that, and offer that this small part of your org that is thinking like could be somewhere else, protected in some way, whatever the baby step is, be willing to lead. That's really leading with vulnerability. I have something in my org that is not best suited here. I will be a better leader and we will have a better experience if it is somewhere else, instead of just assuming you're sending people to finishing school or having to hold on to it because the old way said you had to.
That's brilliant. Okay, senior leaders, here is your favorite part of the entire podcast every week. It is the Talent Sherpa summary. Phil, I know you heard Scott say this earlier because he always says it. The best HR transformation is a cross-functional task force, a 45-day charter, and a slide that recommends renaming the HR business partner.
Okay, I have literally never said that, and nobody should listen to Jackson characterize it that way. Oh my God. All right, here comes the summary. Phil, keep me honest on this one, brother. One, the HR mandate, it hasn't really changed in 30 years, but the work it needs to produce really has. PwC research shows that only 60% of their CEOs, or of the CEOs who responded, view their CHRO as a highly effective partner today, despite consistent investment in what we are calling transformation. And the reason it keeps stalling is that, we're aiming at capability inside, but the design isn't changed. The design problem has to get named before the capability investment can land. Number two, there are two fundamentally different jobs inside any of our current functions. I'll use HR as an example: running the business and changing the business. Run side has payroll, compliance, logistics. Change side handles how work design, org effectiveness, friction identification happen. Asking the same function to do both under one mandate produces a function that really does neither. Three, the loop that sustains the current model is local optimization without any kind of cross-functional accountability. IT, HR, we've been talking about real estate, the physical place. They have their own metrics and they optimize to those metrics. The combined output, the actual experience of work for the people doing it, doesn't have an owner. Gallup's data puts employee engagement at 21%, down from 23%, costs a lot of money every year, but it's not always a people intervention that's going to solve it. It's a structural problem. And last, the chief of work function that fills the accountability gap is pretty interesting. It's independent of HR, IT, and real estate. It's product oriented. It's focused on high value journeys like onboarding, and it reads the work system the way a diagnostic tool reads the body. And it doesn't work if it gets housed inside one of the functions. It needs to be outside and independent. Phil, how did I do?
That's excellent. And it's all going to be even more important the less predictable our days get, which is, we say pace of change, but org structures are blurry. And how are you going to know if any one team is doing the right thing for them if the power pushes further and further from the center as we go?
Do a closeout for us, Phil. If there was one thing that you wanted people to walk away from the conversation with, what would it be?
Well, quite literally for me, I would say walk the work line, which is my website and my newsletter. And just to have the conviction that we can do this, you have to be change positive, curious, and look for every possible chance to iterate to get results and test faster, which is pretty easier in IT, tricky with HR and culture and things that move slower. It is dead last in real estate where we built things for 20 years, but we have to try. That's the only way we're going to know if we're making progress.
Yeah, speed is going to be the currency of the future. There's no doubt. And
speed with willingness to hit bumps along the way. Speed and kind of safety.
Yeah, which is hard, right? And not to break this in a whole different direction, but everyone talks about failing fast until you fail at all, right? And then how you respond in that moment becomes really freaking important, because I've seen all sorts of people say fail fast and then have the browbeating of how could we let this happen? And it's one thing if it's an irrevocable bet. It's another one if it's an area that has to be perfect. But outside of those things, like screw up, stub your toe. That's how we all learn, right? So
yeah, maybe to bring it full circle, I used to have a boss who said, when you get a black eye in corporate real estate, it lasts for a decade, which is why when you say fail fast to a facilities person, they'll have a heart attack like on the spot. At least in IT, there's some people who can move a little quicker, but we've all got to move faster and be okay having short toes, right? So we don't get stepped on so much.
Indeed. And what I keep coming and 10 extra points for the black eye reference. You're welcome.
That's what I wanted to get at the end. Yeah.
Indeed. I'm having a little bit of a Mike Pence moment here. I got a fly in my studio. So please ignore this. That's crazy. We'll leave that in because everyone needs to understand this is like real life. But where I keep coming back to is this accountability gap concept. Every organization we described today has capable people in functions that touch the work system. The problem isn't the people. The problem is that no one is, today at least, in most organizations, accountable for the whole. And there's a specific kind of organizational courage to name that gap, because naming it means admitting that a structure is not producing what the business needs and that someone new has to own the problem. And that feels like loss, but it's not. The leaders who take that step and the ones who bring the work system question to their CEO rather than waiting for the performance numbers to force the question or force the conversation, because you're going to have the conversation. It's a matter of whether you're choosing it or whether the business is choosing it for us. Those are the ones that are going to stop solving the same problem every 2 years with a different label on the solution. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for tuning into the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is, as you know, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. And this is so much fun to do with y'all.
I agree. If you liked today's episode, do us a favor, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe so that you get episodes delivered to you. Write us a review on your favorite platform, whether that might be Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube. We're across all of those. It would really benefit the community if you did it. It helps us. It helps us reach more senior leaders. If you want a little bit more reading, I wrote an article on this subject that you can find at Propulsion AI's perspective page at getpropulsion.ai called While You Make Incremental Changes, Your Competitors Are Reinventing Everything. So check that out too.
It's a good article. I got a preview of it, so I can tell you it's good. And I also, since we're on the topic, want to talk a little bit about Scott's company. Propulsion AI is a workforce intelligence company for private equity. They have AI teammates that surface workforce risk before it closes, and they help leadership teams drive execution afterwards. They're able to translate strategy into individual accountability, coach managers to define roles by outcomes, and give every employee a clear line of sight to what actually matters. It is all good stuff, and it's all done through artificial intelligence. You can learn more at the very cleverly named getpropulsion.ai.
Hey, I say it all the time, but I say it because it's true. If you are a CHRO that's new to your role, or if you're preparing to step into a CHRO role, Jackson has built tools to help you operate at the altitude that role now demands. Personal coaching, the CHRO Ascent Academy I mentioned at the top of the episode, even his best-selling Substack, everything that you need is over at mytalentsherpa.com. Go to www.mytalentsherpa.com.
Hey, and Phil, before we close, I just want to thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Like, I think the work you're doing on the Chief of Work is exactly the conversation that this field needs to be having. So for anyone who's listening and wants to learn more about the work that you're doing or to get in touch, where should they find you?
Very active on LinkedIn, so you can look for me there. And my website for my own consulting work and also my newsletter is walktheworkline.com.
And we're going to have all that in the show notes. So don't feel like you needed to take notes as you're driving or walking the dog. We'll have that for you. So thanks again, Phil, for being here. And thanks to everyone who's listening. Until next time, keep raising the bar. Separate what runs the business from what changes it. And keep on climbing.